Hello.
It's hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello there.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we're going to discover what would have happened had Finn been the Jedi of the Sequel Trilogy. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of the Pente Patrol team. If you want a chance to win in our next giveaway, watch to the end of the video and I will tell you exactly how you can win. Our story begins on Starkiller Base in the year of 34 ABY. The planet Starkiller Base was originally built onto the ancient Jedi world of Ilum. As a means to erase the Jedi from all existence, the Empire began deconstructing the planet, though it was the First Order that finished the plans of the fallen Empire and the failed Imperial remnant. Ilum was always cold, and there was never really a time where the ice world was warm. Finn and Rey had just watched Kylo Ren kill their new friend Han Solo. He was a legendary smuggler, and after that, became the renowned hero of the rebellion. Though he was gone, and Finn and Rey needed to find their way off of Starkiller Base. The Resistance was here, and they were going to destroy the entire planet. They had to. The First Order had just destroyed the Hosnian system, where the New Republic capital was. As Finn and Rey ran through the forest, they heard the ignition of Kylo's lightsaber. Their fear heightened. Only one of them had a lightsaber, and while Finn had First Order trading, and Rey had plenty of experience with the staff, neither one of them were ready to take on a former Jedi that was able to kill an entire order of Jedi and steal its best students. Kylo was getting stronger and stronger by the day, though the two escapees had one benefit. Kylo was shot by a crossbow, which did severe damage to his internal organs. If there was any time to take advantage of Kylo, now would be the time. But it was more evident than ever that he was currently on the hunt. He was instructed by his master, Snoke, to bring the girl back to him. As the snow continued to fall, and the distant battle could be heard raging on in the distance, Finn and Rey jumped back as Kylo rounded a tree without his mask on and used the Force to throw Rey across the forest, slamming her into a tree and knocking her out. Finn ran away from Kylo to check on Rey, as a crimson-wielding Kylo tauntingly walked behind him. Finn got down to Rey and checked on her. She was still unconscious, and then from behind Finn cried out the raging call of the name Traitor. Finn's face scrunched up as he heard the name Traitor referred to him several times since he left the First Order, which was only a mere couple days before. It was his decision, and he believed it to be the right decision. Finn turned around and looked at the person he used to refer to as Sir. This used to be his boss, and now he was going to face him down. Finn pulled the weapon from his belt and ignited the pure blue blade of Anakin Skywalker. Ren didn't like this much at all, as he told Finn that that blade belonged to him. The former stormtrooper tauntingly told Kylo to come and get it from him. The former Jedi swung forward with his red crossguard, smacking blades with Finn. Luckily for Finn, stormtrooper training within the First Order allowed him to gain knowledge of combat with a blade. Finn and Kylo interlocked in a blade as a superior duelist used all of his strength with a lightsaber to push Finn back. Finn swung forward to try and parry Kylo, but he was met with a shove and a swing back. Finn tumbled as Ren pushed his advantage against the former stormtrooper. Finn was shoved up against a tree as Kylo used the edge of his crossblade to cut into Finn's shoulder. Finn began to cry out, screaming in pain, awakening Rey as she looked up over to see nothing but blurriness. Finn pushed Kylo off and dragged the blade of Skywalker around and slashed at Kylo, cutting into his shoulder, upsetting the wannabe Sith Lord even more. Kylo turned around after wilting in pain for a moment, as he threw his fist into Finn's jaw, throwing Finn off of balance. Kylo then turned Finn around and dragged his blade up the middle of Finn's back. Finn yelled out in pain as he dropped to the ground unconscious. Rey looked over at Finn and saw that he was down as she looked at Kylo. He reached out with the Force to try and pull the lightsaber from the snow, though he seemed to be struggling. Rey reached out her hand, trying to pull the blade of Anakin Skywalker so that she may defend herself from Kylo Ren. The lightsaber was locked in gridlock as the hilt juggled in the snow. Kylo frowned as he pushed his hand out more, trying to call the blade of his grandfather to him. As he pulled the blade, it whipped past his head and past Rey as she and Kylo turned around to see Jedi Master Luke Skywalker. Luke looked down at his father's blade and pulled out his own blade as he ignited both the green and blue lightsabers. Kylo stuttered back as he looked at his former master. Luke told Ren that he was disrespecting his grandfather's legacy by trying to wield his blade. Kylo rebutted by telling Luke that it was the same blade that slaughtered younglings and the Jedi during the First Purge. Luke stepped forward into the snow, getting closer to Kylo, as he told him that might be so, but it will never defy what Anakin did to conquer his own demons and come full circle within the Force to become the Chosen One. Kylo yelled out, telling Luke that he needed to stop living in the past, acting like anything Anakin did was more grandeur than the accomplishments of Vader. Luke looked in horror. Since the night he lost Kylo, he thought that maybe there would be redemption within him, but it seemed that was not the case. Kylo Ren was not Ben Solo, because Ben would never be so vile. Ben used to love hearing about Anakin and his stories, especially when Ahsoka visited the temple from time to time, but now Ben hated the idea of Skywalker. Luke pulled the two blades around into his form position as he looked at Kylo and told him that it was time to stop living in the dreams of the Sith. Kylo stepped forward, getting angrier by each step, telling Luke that he'd become more powerful because of his allegiance to Snoke and to the dark side. Luke couldn't believe what he was hearing, as he told Kylo that he was imagining it. This self-proclaimed power never lasted. The Sith waited over a millennia to have power, and Palpatine lost that power less than 25 years after gaining it. Not to mention, the generations of Sith would grow into power and then lose it. Kylo wasn't even alive during the short reign the Sith had in generations. Now he wanted to throw everything away to have a chance at a fever dream only one of thousands of Sith could ever accomplish. Sure, it was in his blood to be able to achieve it, but was it really possible? Kylo was nothing like Anakin Skywalker. Luke frowned after seeing how Kylo had fallen so low and apologized for everything. Kylo growled as he leapt forward, having heard enough of these apologies. Han Solo had failed him as a father and Luke had failed him as a master. Now Kylo wanted to cut off the loose ends and kill both Han and Luke in the same night, doing what Snoke thought he couldn't do. Kylo swung down as Luke twisted back and blocked his father's blade, and then swung his blade forward, clashing with Kylo as he teetered back. A little to the right, Rey ran over to make sure that Finn was okay. Luckily, he wasn't bleeding, but his back had a massive cut straight down the middle. Rey worried if Finn would ever be able to walk again. Rey then heard heavy footsteps as she looked over to see the Wookiee warrior Chewbacca coming to help Finn off of the snow. Luke heard the growl and didn't have to look over as he pushed Kylo back. Ren screamed out in his anger as he tried his hardest to keep up, but Luke shoved him back further and further. Luke was masterful as a Jedi, and Kylo was far from masterful yet. The ground began to crack as Ren tumbled backwards, looking at Luke as a valley formed between the former master and student. Luke didn't have time to worry about Ren as he turned around to see Chewbacca carrying Finn back to the Falcon. Luke looked at Rey as he sheathed his blades and told her to follow Chewie into the Falcon. He'd be right behind them. R2 whistled from the astromech spot on Luke's personal X-Wing. The Millennium Falcon and Luke's Red 5 lifted off of the ground and took off as both starships fled the system. On the other side of the Force, Poe Dameron and the rest of the Resistance Force were able to blow a hole into the exhaust port and create an explosion on Starkiller Base. The Resistance fighters fled, all getting in line behind the Millennium Falcon and Red 5, as all the starships jumped into hyperspace back to the planet they all launched their assault from. The planet they returned to was Dakar. When they eventually landed on the world, Luke was the first one to greet his sister, as he apologized for what happened to Han, and what happened to Kylo. The brother and sister wrapped their arms around each other and gave each other a tight hug. Chewie carried Finn out to a small medical capsule as the Resistance members took Finn to the medical bay. Rey followed closely behind to make sure her new friend was okay. She held his hand as she followed closely with the Resistance members that were taking care of Finn. Luke and Leia were still outside of the Falcon, talking as Leia asked where he'd been. Luke admitted that he had been gone looking for answers. Luke said that he failed as a Grand Master, much like Yoda had, but instead of going into exile like Yoda did, he searched for answers. Leia looked at her brother and told him that it was because he gave up on one thing that he separated himself from the Jedi Order from before. Luke looked at his sister with a puzzled expression. Leia asked Luke what helped him bring their father back to the light. Luke said it was love, compassion, trust, and dedication. Leia nodded her head, telling her brother that it was the first one, love. Luke paused for a moment and thought back. He realized that in all of his attempts to study the Jedi Order before him, he undid everything, every very thing that made him stand unique amongst the former Jedi Order, and the sole reason that helped him fight the adversity of the dark side and bring Vader back to the light. Luke stood silent for a moment. Leia put her arm around her brother and told him that it wasn't anything to fret about. Yes, it was a failure, but Leia knew just as well as anyone else within the former rebellion that failure could teach more than success ever could. While it was a shame that the Jedi had to die for Luke's failure, it was Luke's failure that could save the Jedi ways. Luke could do it again with 2 new students and teach them that it was okay to have love and to care for others without disrupting some ancient code. Leia looked at her brother and told him that he was too interested in what was rather than what would be. Luke smiled at his sister. She reminded him of his little green teacher. Luke thought for a moment as he told Leia he'd try again. He'd rebuild again. And unlike Yoda, he wouldn't go into exile. Leia smiled as she asked what he was really doing for so long. Luke told his sister that he visited every Jedi temple that was left behind, other than the one that was on Ilum. He went into each temple to understand more about the failures of the past and why they happened, or how they happened. Some had to do with systematic failure, others because of Sith, and some, like Yoda's, because of his own arrogance. The Jedi had continued to fail because they continued to forget the most important aspects of the Force. Luke learned so much, but he couldn't figure out why they lasted for so long compared to the Sith. Leia thought that Luke was just being silly. He was overanalyzing everything about the Jedi Order. He was overlooking what their impact on the galaxy was and the hope that they gave. She told Luke to remember what Obi-Wan told him. Luke smiled. Old Obi-Wan Kenobi. Both Luke and Leia had their fond memories of the old Jedi Master. Luke needed to just trust in the Force, and he hadn't been doing that. As a Grand Master of the Jedi Order, he lost sight of the most important values he held near and dear from the first time he became a master with Grogu. Leia and Han never blamed Luke for what happened to Ben, but Luke also needed to stop blaming himself for what happened to Ben. Luke told Leia that her son was too far gone. Leia looked at Luke and told him that no one was ever really gone. Luke smiled as he looked down at his father's blade. Leia smiled and Luke smiled back. Inside of the base, Rey sat next to the medical capsule that held Finn. The medics were filling the capsule with Bacta as a means to help Finn's back recover. The medics told Rey that Finn would be okay, but he needed to stay in stasis for a little while. They didn't know when or how long it would take for him to wake up, but she could stay if she wanted, but she didn't have to. For now, it was all a matter of time. Rey nodded her head and fixed a couple of boxes together and sat down. Rey heard footsteps and looked to her right to see Luke walking into the medical room. He asked if Finn was okay. Rey stuttered over her words. She still couldn't believe she was standing in the presence of Luke Skywalker. He was a hero of the rebellion. Luke smiled and told Rey that the two of them had a lot of potential within the Force. Rey looked back at Luke and questioned him. Luke smiled and said that she and Finn had the potential for greatness. Rey smiled a little weakly, and she didn't really know how to feel about this offer. In all honesty, it was a lot to take in. Luke told Rey that she didn't need to have her answer ready at any particular time. It was just him wondering if she would think about becoming a Jedi. Luke told her that he was going to rebuild a new Jedi Order on a new Jedi Code, and he needed new students willing to learn. Rey smiled and told Luke that she would consider his offer. Luke nodded and walked out of the room. This behavior from Luke was inspired by his twin sister. Leia always brought the best out of people. She did it when she was a child with Obi-Wan, and she did it as a leader of the rebellion, helping the Ghost crew in the early days of the war, and leading assaults when the war was ending. Leia had a great gift, and she continued to use it to help her brother out. Luke should have come to her when his order was first destroyed, but he didn't really think about it. Everything seemed to come full circle though, and that was perfectly okay. Moments later, an alarm began to sound within the base. Luke looked around trying to find his sister, trying to ask what happened. Though, from the panic of the troops in the base, it was clearly the First Order. The base began packing up. The resistance was very fragile, and this was one of very few resistance cells left in the galaxy. Other than the New Republic that was mostly destroyed in the Hosnian system, Leia knew that this band of rebels needed to stick together. There were 3 cruisers in orbit of the planet. One of them was Admiral Akbar's new flagship at the moment, called the Radiss, named after the legendary admiral from the Battle of Scarif. Regardless, the Resistance had to pack up and go immediately. The base was on high alert. Rey got a hold of Finn's capsule and helped load it into one of the transport vessels. Poe Dameron and the rest of the Resistance fighter group hopped into their X-Wings and Y-Wings and prepared for combat. Their only mission was to protect the fleet. It seemed as if some TIE fighters came out of hyperspace with the intention of stalling the Resistance. Outside of Jakar, a space battle ensued. Only a dogfight, but it was enough to get Luke to hop into his X-Wing and aid the Resistance fighters. Luke was prepared as he and Poe led the counteroffensive against the First Order. These pilots were very similar to Imperial pilots. The only benefit First Order TIE fighters had is that they had rear cannons that could create havoc for bad pilots. But considering the Resistance pilots just took down Starkiller base, this was the best the Resistance had to offer, especially with Luke and Poe in their corner. The Resistance fighters were able to successfully take the fight to the First Order as the pilots and TIE fighters struggled to hold their own against the Resistance. This bought enough time for the rebels on the ground to get their supplies into the star cruisers above. The final shipments off the ground were able to escape the surface as 2 Resurgent-class Star Destroyers and 1 Dreadnought entered hyperspace. The Dreadnought was equipped with a massive cannon beneath its hull, and it unloaded a massive round into the surface of the former and newly abandoned Resistance base. Poe and Luke finished up the fight against the TIE fighters as Leia requested all ships to the hangar bay. Poe tried to defy orders, but on his way to face down the Dreadnought, Luke buzzed him by flying right over top of him, telling him that this was not the fight he wanted to pick. The resources would serve them better if they escaped now, rather than fight the First Order fleet here. Poe barreled back around, and with Luke right behind him, they pulled into the hangar bays of the Star Cruisers, as Luke caught up to the deck, and within moments, the Resistance fleet was in hyperspace. While in hyperspace, Luke and Poe exited their starfighters as Luke walked over to Poe. R2-D2 and BB-8 made their way into the interior of the ship, while Luke talked to Poe about what he did. Luke scolded Poe for being so ignorant enough to do what he did. Poe looked at Luke and bit his lip. He could say something back to Luke. Luke continued telling Poe that this was the most important part of leadership, was making sure that your troops were safe, not throwing them into an unsafe situation that could cause them to die. Poe put his finger on Luke's chest and then asked him to elaborate on why he spent the last several days looking for a map leading to him, when he was the one who left his order to die. Luke looked down at Poe's finger, and then back to the man that stood in front of him, as he threw back the words telling Poe that at least he was able to learn from his own mistakes. The mistakes Poe almost caused would have cost the Resistance a battle in the future, or the defense of its only flagship in the Resistance's arsenal. Maybe if Poe could get through his head that there were more important battles to win, he would accomplish a simple task of keeping the Resistance fighting another day. Poe stuttered for a moment, and before he could speak, Luke told him to think about what he had done, and what had to be won, and what didn't. Luke expressed that the battle over Yavin needed to be won, but the battle over Dakar was a revenge mission focused on a personal vendetta. It would be wise to remember the difference. Luke turned away from Poe as he stood next to his X-Wing silently. Luke was genuinely annoyed. If he had ever pulled that maneuver during the days of the rebellion, Mothma or Leia would have torn him apart. Luke turned the corner and headed towards the medical facility. Finn had gotten all hooked up, and Rey was sleeping by his side in a small chair. It wasn't comfortable, but after all the difficulties of the last few days and the lack of sleep she got, it was completely reasonable to understand why she was sleeping. Luke walked into the room and looked at Finn, and then over to Rey. He saw that she was sleeping next to him and then walked back out of the room, after seeing that Finn's heart monitor was doing well. Luke turned back and started walking back to the bridge. Luke started talking to Leia once he got there and asked what the plan was. Leia said that they were going to emerge from hyperspace near a former rebel base, but the new plan was to continue through space with the hopes of grouping up with some remnants of the New Republic. Leia noted that Admiral Akbar had been reaching out to planets across the galaxy, trying to see which fleets were still available. Luke asked if Akbar was able to come back with anything. Leia admitted that he hadn't, but with the fall of the Hosnian system, there was a good chance that the New Republic was blocking any transmissions from deep space, even if it was a Resistance. As far as the New Republic was concerned, everyone was an enemy, and the First Order was more of a threat than they originally thought. The Resistance was all alone as of right now. Luke looked out of the bridge window as hyperspace came to an end and the ship began to creak and shake after coming out of hyperspace. Leia continued forward and looked ahead. All was good, and then within seconds, alarms began to sound as one of the deckhands yelled out that there was a proximity alert. Akbar looked over and told them to turn on the holotable, and within a second, the Supremacy and part of the First Order fleet arrived at hyperspace. Admiral Akbar jumped and demanded the entire fleet prep its rear shields and get ready to jump to hyperspace. Leia told the deck to stop. Luke continued off of what his twin said by mentioning that the First Order had most likely followed them and tracked them through hyperspace. Luke told Akbar that they needed to push the engines and move forward. The Resistance ships were much lighter than the capital ships the First Order had. Luke yelled across as Akbar gave out orders and prepared the engines to move forward at full thrust. Luke told the deckhands to call out to Mon Calamari, Kuat, and Corellia to see if there were any available New Republic fleets that could get here in time. Leia told another deckhand to try other planets in the near area, like Dantooine, Lothal, and Hypori. Everything in the bridge was at high alert. The Radiss and the support ships next to it boosted forward as they moved to avoid the Supremacy. Luke then turned around and spoke through the comms, telling every starfighter to get out of the ship and defend the vessel. Leia looked at Luke, as he said that Kylo would be coming out to cause as much damage as he could. Leia nodded her head as Luke made his way out of the room. Poe entered his X-Wing and several other rebel fighters entered their own respective starfighters, and abandoned the hangar bay as they all prepared to defend the fleet. Luke made his way to the hangar bay as he hopped in Red 5 and left the hangar bay. Luke barreled out of the hangar bay and saw 3 wings of TIE fighters heading towards him, and in front of him was Kylo Ren. He could tell Kylo was so inspired by his grandfather, but Luke knew himself that Kylo would never be edgy enough to be Vader. As long as Kylo didn't focus on becoming himself, he wouldn't be a threat. He'd only be trying to be something that he couldn't be. But if Kylo turned around and tried to make his own legacy, then he would become a true threat. Luke pulled his X-Wing to the side and told the wing of A-Wings to spread out and split over to the port and starboard sides, while the bulk of fighters, which were all X-Wings, shot down the middle. Poe and the rest of the X-Wings lined up behind Red 5 as they began to lead a defense of the Radiss and its supporting ships. A massive dogfight began, as the pilots of both the Resistance and the First Order got into combat. The Supremacy and the massive First Order fleet moved closer and closer as the Resistance tried to distance itself from them. The dogfight intensified, as Luke and Kylo got into an intense dogfight themselves. The duel between age and ego. Luke whipped his aging X-Wing over the hull of the Radiss as Kylo pushed his TIE Advanced as hard as he could, revving the engine as hard as possible, trying to take down his old teacher. Kylo's blood boiled, and then he felt the presence of his mother. Maybe there was really good left in him, but he tried to push it all away as he slammed down on the trigger as he shot his TIE blasters out into space, all narrowly missing Luke. Something for sure was true, and it was the fact that these Skywalkers were incredible pilots. Luke flipped his X-Wing back and then ripped his handbrake at the bottom of the cockpit as he pulled the gear around to the right as he faced Kylo and blasted away. Kylo yelled out as he whipped his starfighter to the left, but it was too late. One of the wings was clipped down the line and his starfighter began to spin out of control, back towards the Supremacy. Luke pulled back around so he could finish what he created, but there were TIE fighters covering Kylo's escape. The dogfight ended with minimal Resistance casualties, as the First Order pulled back half of one of 3 TIE fighter squadrons back to the Supremacy. The Resistance fighters pulled back into the hangar bay. They all got their ships landed and exited their starfighters. Inside of the medical bay, Finn jolted up from his sleep as he yelled the name Rey. Rey was still sleeping next to him and then jumped up as she saw Finn awake, and heard her name too. Finn rolled himself over and looked at her with his head. He smiled and asked if she was okay. Rey grinned and told him that she was perfectly fine, but she was very curious to know how he was feeling. Finn looked around and said he wasn't really sure, he couldn't feel much. Rey moved her seat over next to him and grabbed a hold of his hand and told him that he was in a bacta suit. Finn acknowledged it as he looked over and looked at Rey and asked what happened. Rey exclaimed to Finn that Luke showed up right after Kylo hurt him and defended the two of them. Chewie took Finn to the Falcon and the Resistance was able to blow up Starkiller Base. But the First Order came back to the car and the Resistance had to evacuate. Now they were seemingly tracked through hyperspace and currently on the run. Finn sighed. He told Rey that the First Order had developed the technology, he just didn't get a chance to tell anyone about that technology. Rey told Finn not to worry about it. Everything seemed to be alright from what she had heard. Rey hadn't actually heard anything. She was asleep. She just was trying to keep Finn calm. Ever since he woke her, his heart monitor was spiking, so she was doing her best to keep him calm and keep his heart rate down, as she rubbed his hand with her hands. The door shot open as Luke walked in. Rey and Finn looked over to Luke and asked if everything was alright. Luke nodded his head as he asked if the two of them were doing alright. Finn nodded his head, and Luke walked up to the monitors next to Finn's bed, on the opposite side from Rey. As he looked at all the data, everything looked to be good. It seemed as if Finn would be able to walk within a couple of hours. Luke asked if the two of them would like to participate in the beginning of the new Jedi Order. Finn looked at Rey, and then back to Luke. The Jedi Master noticed this and thought for a moment. He realized that things may have to be different with the first 2 students in this new order. Nothing for sure yet, but a possibility of it. Luke then told the two of them that they had time to decide. They didn't need to answer just yet, but Luke continued as he told them that they were both very powerful with the Force, as he said that he would have to guess both likely had a midichlorian count to the average Jedi Council member in the days of the Republic. Rey looked back at Finn, and then back to Luke, telling him that they would think about his offer. Luke bowed to the two of them and left the room as he headed back for the bridge of the Star Cruiser. Inside the medical room, Rey asked Finn what his thoughts were on the topic. Finn thought about it. It would be a great opportunity, but he would only do it if she did it with him. Rey smiled and then looked down at the floor as she thought about the implications of doing such. It could be a great opportunity for the both of them to learn about the Force and expand their knowledge on what they barely knew anything about. Rey told Finn that she would be willing to do it with him. Moments later, Luke entered the bridge as Leia turned around with excitement on her face. Luke asked her what the news was, as she admitted that the New Republic fleet was heading towards their location. It had the only New Republic Super Star Dreadnought in the Alliance fleet. Luke asked if it was a remodified Super Star Destroyer the Alliance captured. Leia nodded her head. The ship was stolen from the Empire before the Battle of Jakku, and it was remodified to serve the Alliance, and then the New Republic against the Remnant, though it was almost decommissioned after the New Republic put a hold on the production of all warships. Luckily, the Queen of Mon Cala requested that the vehicle be placed in their care for the time being, considering the Imperial Remnant liked to frequently raid the capital ship production yards at Mon Cala. It was approved by the New Republic, and it was still there up until the Hosnian system was destroyed. Luckily, Akbar still had some of the old Alliance codes used to get through to contacts on Mon Cala, which enabled him to request the largest New Republic fleet the galaxy had at the moment. It would take about an hour or so until they got there, but it would be the perfect escape for the Resistance. Inside of the Supremacy, Kylo Ren exited his broken starfighter and marched his way up to the throne room of his master. Kylo got into a lift as it took him up to his master's throne room. When the door opened, Kylo walked forward and stood before Snoke himself. Snoke growled. He was very disappointed in Kylo for losing to Skywalker twice. Snoke admitted he was glad to see that Skywalker came out of retirement to face him down, but it was a shame that he'd never have the chance because the Resistance fleet would be blown out of the sky by the First Order. Kylo knelt silently, while his master spoke at him. Though after Snoke monologued for a bit about the downfall of the Jedi and the Resistance, he turned his attention to Kylo. Snoke called out Kylo for his failures. He told Kylo that he was nothing more than a child in a mask. When Kylo stood up to stand up for himself, a wave of electricity bounced off the floor and covered him as he fell to the ground in agony. Kylo looked at Snoke with anger on his face as Snoke told Kylo that he would never live up to the image of Darth Vader, and until he got that out of his mind, he would always stand in the shadow of someone leagues more powerful than he. Ren looked at Snoke as he mocked Kylo by standing up. Snoke told Kylo to do it, to ignite his fiery lightsaber and strike him down. Kylo didn't bat an eye as he looked into Snoke's eyes. The Master of Evil stepped forward, inching himself closer to Kylo Ren. Ren did not back down. He stared into the face of evil and straightened his posture. He was not afraid of this monster. He didn't fear the punishment to come from this. Instead, he welcomed the opportunity to do what Vader could not, because what Snoke said was true. Vader was only the apprentice, so Kylo was going to become the Master and the Supreme Leader. Snoke watched Kylo hover his hand over his lightsaber, and then he moved his hand away as he stared at Snoke. The two of them started to encircle the invisible line on the floor, as their eyes never left each other. Snoke raised his hand and realized he couldn't move Kylo, because all along Kylo was waiting for this moment. He stepped forward and Snoke was completely caught off guard by the moment. Snoke tried to shoot lightning through the floor at Kylo, but he danced around it like he saw it before it even happened. Snoke watched Kylo move in closer, realizing that this was the true heir to Vader's throne. Snoke stepped back and called out his guards to help him, as Kylo grinned, and then from his side he threw his weapon at Snoke. The Master of Evil tried to stop it, but before he could defend himself, the blade shot through his chest, and the last thing that Snoke ever saw were the boots of Kylo Ren walking towards him. Kylo, instead of fighting the guards, told them that he was their new master. If they didn't obey him, then they would die in a similar fashion. Kylo had everything planned out. He wanted Starkiller Base to be a failure of the Supreme Leader, because if Snoke failed, then he was no longer necessary to the First Order, or the mission they intended to complete in the galaxy. The First Order needed to be effective at every turn, and Snoke was just a part of Kylo's plans. Seriously, another Death Star, but bigger than the first and bigger than the second? Kylo knew it would fail, and instead of falling for it, he allowed Snoke to fail so that he could take his place. Kylo knew that the First Order would rally around a strong leader, not a weak one who failed to do something that Emperor Palpatine could not. The guards all looked at each other, and they didn't know what to do. But they all knelt before Kylo as they submitted their loyalty to him. He was their supreme leader now, and there was no going around that. They needed to follow him and his will and his vision alone. The admirals, the generals, and everyone else inside of the First Order now worked for Kylo Ren, and for the first time, they would not fail. Kylo turned around and walked towards the lift as the 6 guards motioned behind him and left the throne room with him. Snoke's body was left behind in the throne room he used to helm. When the lift reached its level, Kylo stormed out without his helmet. He played the part he wanted to play, and everyone bought it. Now he was going to be himself, Kylo Ren, heir to the throne of the First Order and supreme leader of their movement against the New Republic. Kylo knew the best time to strike was when both good guys and the bad guys were weak, just like Emperor Palpatine did during the Clone Wars. Kylo was going to establish his own legacy and his own rule over the galaxy, and after the Resistance was crushed, he would move to the former capital of the galaxy and place his throne on Coruscant. But first, he and his new guard marched to the bridge where Admiral Hux awaited, overseeing the attack of the Resistance. Hux immediately noticed that Snoke's guard was following Kylo. Assuming that Kylo betrayed Snoke, he begged the question. Kylo, unlike the Empire, unlike Sidious, and unlike Snoke, would not stand for inept leaders. Kylo looked over at the waste man standing next to him and snapped Hux's neck as he turned to face the bridge. Kylo turned over to the next highest ranked individual on deck, Captain Peavy, and told him that he was now the officer on deck of the ship. The officer saluted and demanded that someone dispose of the trash left in the room. He turned his attention to the Resistance fleet as Kylo told Peavy to move the fleet into attack position. Peavy called out 2 star cruisers on the right and the left flank and demanded that they jump into hyperspace just a little ahead of the Resistance fleet, and then they'd be able to blockade them against the Supremacy. Kylo smiled, and while he wouldn't be able to personally kill the last Jedi, he knew that the death of the Jedi would be under his orders, and that was more than enough for him. The 2 resurgent Star Destroyers jumped forward and immediately, when they exited hyperspace, turned their heavy cannons to face the Radiss. It was a brilliant move, but Akbar expected it. He assumed the First Order would move their fleet around to blockade the Resistance, but he didn't think it would take him as long as it did. Akbar demanded that the forward shields be raised, and that the 2 transports following behind them line up behind the Radiss with the port or starboard shields raised to maximum power. The Radiss raised its port and starboard shields as it took a massive beating from both sides. The entire ship began to rock from side to side as the Resistance members inside began to panic. Akbar told everyone to steady the course. At the moment, to everyone, it looked as if it was going to be the end of the Resistance. It looked as if everything would come crashing down on the Resistance, and their fleet would fall apart and the dream of peace would die with them. Moments later, an Imperial-era Super Star Destroyer exited hyperspace with an array of Mon Calamari cruisers, some of them winged MC-80s, 1 or 2 MC-75s, and several of the New Republic modified cruisers that were armed with more weapons and heavier shields. The New Republic models were built for the Imperial Remnant and the return of Thrawn, which was silenced by the New Republic fleets. Kylo yelled out to blow these pieces of junk out of the sky. Captain Peary demanded that the entire First Order fleet prepare for combat. Though because the Resurgence-class Star Destroyers near the Radiss didn't expect the party, their hulls crumbled under the amount of firepower released by the New Republic fleet. Akbar smiled as he ordered the support ships to continue moving behind the lines on the New Republic, as he demanded that the Radiss turn around to face the Supremacy. The Admiral of the New Republic fleet that was stationed over Mon Cala was actually the grandson of Admiral Radiss, and he told all vessels to move forward into attack formation Beta, which was in coalition with what Admiral Akbar used during the Battle of Endor. The young Radiss was cunning just like his grandfather, and was ready to play by Akbar's rules. The Supremacy was loaded for a frontal assault, though the only issue is that their shields were not primed for combat. The New Republic unloaded everything it had as the First Order felt the brunt of the attack. Akbar ordered all pilots out to their ships and prepare for an assault. All fighters go for their X-Wings, A-Wings, and B-Wings. Following them would be Y-Wings to provide support for the heaviest bombers in the New Republic fleet, the MG-100 Star Fortress SF-17s, or simply the SF-17s. These bombers were used very strategically, and if they weren't ordered by the proper leader, then it could result in heavy casualties. Akbar knew where to place these massive bombers. He also ensured that these bombers kept a wide formation to avoid catastrophe. The New Republic bounced back from what it seemed to be the ultimate defeat, as the Resistance and New Republic fleets mounted up the perfect master flank. The First Order was not prepared, and then, when all the fighters came at them, Captain Peary panicked as he ordered every single TIE fighter wing out of every single hangar bay and into combat. Kylo looked over and watched as the Supremacy's hull began to flicker. It was getting damaged very heavily by the former Super Star Destroyer. Kylo knew that the Supremacy was built by Snoke to look threatening, but in reality, the First Order lacked the productivity that the Empire came by so easily. The Supremacy, while decades newer than the New Republic SSD, was much weaker and certainly less armed. It didn't have the shields to compete either. The only benefit the Supremacy had was a row of 4 mortar cannons, the same ones that they'd been using to bombard the Radiss until the New Republic arrived. There was also another thing about the Super Star Destroyer. It was angled perfectly. All the cannons on the ship could hit the Supremacy, while not all the cannons on the Supremacy could hit the Super Star Destroyer. The 2 Star Destroyers next to the Radiss tumbled apart as the Resistance moved into attack position. Leia stood on the bridge watching everything unfold before her. Last time a battle was this big, Luke was watching from the side, and now he was in his starfighter, side by side with Poe Dameron, as they moved into attack position. The Resistance fighters came up on their assault on the First Order, as the First Order played catch-up. Captain PV, while elder, and having served the Empire, didn't have the experience as the same admiral who single-handedly took down the morale from the Empire during the Battle of Endor. Akbar was very experienced, and his experience went all the way back to the Clone Wars. Everything was ready. The First Order was clocked in for another loss, as one of the Star Destroyers crumbled in space next to the Supremacy. Luke led wings of A-Wings across the starboard flank of the First Order line, while Poe and his X-Wings led one across the port side. The B-Wings made a beeline down the middle of the flank, with the Millennium Falcon providing cover fire, and the Y-Wings and SF-17s following behind. B-Wings were great in fighter-on-fighter combat, but they were also excellent bombers. The Supremacy also had another issue. Much like a traditional ISD, it was only stocked with heavy cannons, meant for ship-on-ship combat, not for anti-fighter capabilities. Kylo growled as he demanded to know where the TIE fighters were. Captain Perry said that they were currently being held up by both flanks of A-Wings and X-Wings. Kylo looked over at the battle map on the hologram in the middle of the room as he saw another one of his Star Destroyers get dropped out of the sky. The SF-17s were approaching, and without TIE fighters to take them down, there was a very good chance that the Supremacy would be ripped in half by the amount of bombs these bombers were capable of dropping on any given location. Kylo turned around to Peary and ordered him to have the fleet retreat to the core. Peary tried to rebuttal by saying that the core was where the New Republic was strongest. Kylo said that not everywhere in the core was exactly fond of the New Republic. Captain Peary demanded the fleet retreat, as he also ordered the closest Resurgent-class Star Destroyer to move to the bow of the Supremacy. The ship moved as ordered while the Supremacy turned its massive hull around. Captain Peary redirected the shields as the ship moved. Another Resurgence got destroyed as the New Republic crept in on the First Order. Kylo looked out the window to see the Resurgence that moved up to the bow of the Supremacy also get destroyed, but not by the capital ships. Instead, it was destroyed by B-Wings, Y-Wings, and the SF-17s. The First Order then immediately left into hyperspace as the remaining TIE fighters were shot out of the sky without any chance for mercy. The only reason is when someone blows an entire star system out of the sky, there is no penance, only pain. The New Republic was not going to make the same mistake a second time. The Resistance fighters made their way back to the hangar bays of their ships as Admiral Akbar and Radiss II began talks of strategy on moving forward. The scene had changed so much over the years, and especially after Mon Mothma passed away. But the agenda was always the same: find peace and restore justice into the galaxy. No one knew where the First Order was heading anymore. On the other hand, Luke didn't go to the bridge. Instead, he made his way down into the medical room where Rey was helping Finn stand on his own for the first time. They were holding on to each other, and it was obvious that the connection they had within the first couple days they first met was very strong. Rey was very careful with Finn as he regained some of his composure and some of his strength. Luke walked into the door as Rey and Finn looked at him. Luke smiled and then asked them on their thoughts on moving forward. Both Rey and Finn looked into each other's eyes. There was a certain glimmer between the two of them, and their smile glowed like stardust. The two of them looked back towards Luke and told him that they would like to be Jedi as well. Luke smiled as he told them that they could leave when they were ready. Finn looked at Rey and shook his head as if to say that he was ready now. Luke saw this and asked if he was for sure. Finn smiled. Luke grinned and then told the two of them to pack warm. They'd be leaving in 10. Luke had a plan this time. He wasn't going to do what he did to Grogu. He wasn't going to do what he did to Ben Solo or the other several members of the Jedi that joined the ranks of his former order. The truth is, Luke was getting old and he needed to get this right. Ahsoka was out in the galaxy somewhere and so was Ezra. But Luke couldn't try and find them now. Luke needed Rey and Finn to be ready and to be the ones that he could train. This was the most desperate hour for the Jedi. It wasn't the Resistance, it wasn't the New Republic, but for Luke, he knew that Kylo was growing in his strength, and he knew he needed two able-bodied, younger Jedi to face off against him. Luke would have to be the best teacher he'd been in all of his lifetime, and use these lessons that he was taught and take them to an extreme level by teaching Finn and Rey how to access their natural abilities and their natural powers. When the time came, they were ready to go. Chewie had the Falcon ready as he was going along with Luke, Finn, and Rey from point to point. The Falcon in Red 5 lifted off of the hangar bay and jumped into hyperspace immediately. Luke informed his sister he was going to right the wrongs of his past, and she knew exactly what he meant. And in just the same words Obi-Wan taught her as a little girl, she wished that the Force would be with her brother on his newest journey. The four would arrive at a planet out in the far reaches of space called Maikito. The planet was once the site of a battle during the Clone Wars. There were still wreckages from the war. Luke took Finn and Rey out into the cold. Quite frankly, Rey was getting a good feel for the galaxy she never got to see. She'd been on two planets that were naturally colder than the coldest Jakku ever got. There was a lot that both Finn and Rey had to unravel about themselves, and Luke could tell. He knew that just like when he first met Yoda, they needed to understand themselves before they could be who they were meant to be. Luke told them that he wanted to bring them to Maikito because here is where one could collect a Kyber crystal. This planet had quite a few, scattered about, but they were all present. Ilum is where most of the Kyber crystals were in the galaxy, but since that planet was, well, destroyed, it couldn't be used anymore. Luke took the two of them out to a lonely platform amongst the clouds and told them that they needed to harmonize with themselves. Maikito was a balanced planet. There was no dark, no light. It was very neutral, and there was nothing that would either draw Finn or Rey to the light or the dark. It would be perfectly balanced for them to learn. The only thing the Force could do was lead them to their own internal draw, which naturally one could lean to the light or the dark. So naturally, Luke had both Finn and Rey stand on a platform and then kneel. The wind on Maikito could cut through bone, or at least felt as such. Rey and Finn were dressed warm enough by Maikito standards, and this would be the perfect place for Luke to get a good feeling for the two individuals that he was going to be working with. Finn and Rey let their natural essences flow through them. Luke held a little device in his hand that could read midichlorian counts without having to take a blood sample. Both Rey and Finn had an equal amount of 15,000. Luke thought it to be incredible that Finn wasn't killed or found out while being within the First Order. He could be a great case of a late bloomer though. Regardless, Luke took a seat across from Rey and Finn and felt their essences bounce off of one another. It was weird. They both naturally connected, yet there was a darkness that resonated between the two of them. It existed in both of them, probably because of their traumatic pasts. They, as Force users, might become aggressive or easily angered. Luke thought back to his father's life, the life of a slave. This was very similar to the experience that Finn had and what he probably most likely encountered in the First Order. Same goes for the treatment of Rey on Jakku. Though Luke realized at this point, Finn and Rey were both old enough to understand right from wrong, and Luke understood that he could teach them what they needed to learn. He didn't have to sugarcoat it, he could just tell them. Luke let them continue this exercise for a number of minutes. It took a little while, but the result was surprisingly productive. Luke found that both Rey and Finn were able to show growth in the short training. While the cold weather was a bit of a damper on their training, Luke would show the two in-training Jedi how to allow the Force to consume them with warmth. It was something that he learned throughout his training and during his stay on Maikito a while back. Rey and Finn were surprisingly fast learners, but for Luke, he realized that both of them would have to go through a lot more until they were truly ready to become Jedi. While they were here on Maikito, they would need to find their own Kyber crystals. There was no way around it. Without Ilum or Jedha around anymore, the lack of Kyber crystals brought Luke to Maikito during the Age of the Empire. Especially because during the Age of the Empire, it was obvious the Empire owned Ilum, so Luke didn't go. Luke found his own Kyber crystal here in Maikito, the same one that powered his new lightsaber, the green one that is. The same one that looked very similar to the one that Kenobi had during the Clone Wars. Luke knew it would provide Finn and Rey with the perfect opportunity to try and obtain their crystals here. It was a long-term process, and because both students were so new, it would obviously take them time. Regardless, on the other side of the galaxy, the New Republic, or as it was now, the remaining fleet and warriors from the New Republic, mounted up on Mon Calamari. This was a safe zone for now, that is, until the First Order decided to take the fight to them. No one knew that Snoke had been killed, and no one knew that the new leader of the First Order was now Kylo Ren. They all did know that the last time they united together against the First Order, they won. The entire galaxy witnessed the power of the First Order and how it would take apart a divided galaxy. But with the power the First Order possessed and the weaknesses the New Republic showed, the core could be in a state of panic. The Queen of Mon Cala, daughter of the former King Li Char, who served during the Clone Wars, suggested to the New Republic that they stand tall, not as two forces, but as one. Admiral Akbar united the Alliance in a victory over Endor. Leia and Mothma united the Alliance in its darkest moments before they had any real fight. It was time that the New Republic unite with the old and the new faces. Everyone would have loved it if Mon Mothma and Bail Organa were still here, but the truth is that a new generation would have to take the mantle. They would have to face the same fear and terror that generations before felt. The galaxy Luke and Leia grew up in was full of Imperial reign. The galaxy this generation saw was one with rebellion taking a fight to the Empire, and proving that no matter the size, one could always be poised enough to become victorious. The rebellion was poised, and the peace, freedom, and justices that every individual faced after the fall of the Empire, and not long after, Imperial Remnant, gave this generation the feeling that anything could be possible. The thought of an empire was forgotten, and all that could be seen was peace. The New Republic tried to give it diplomatic reasons with the sons and daughters of oppression, and it cost them the new capital of the galaxy. All the power would return to Coruscant, and the New Republic needed to be the first ones back. They needed to show the galaxy that oppression would never reign again. Moments later, one of the deckhands would run into the briefing room and interrupt everything. While many wouldn't be given the chance to speak, the information and the videos he had to show would be everything they needed to know. The First Order had arrived outside of Coruscant, and not only that had they arrived, they came with violence and oppression. Leia looked in horror to see what her son was capable of. It was just as bad as what her father could have done. But in so many ways, it was actually worse. Maybe it was the dilemma Obi-Wan faced. Facing Maul was easy. He was never there to see him develop into a Sith Lord, but facing Anakin was heartbreaking because he saw the innocence and the beauty within the heart of someone with love before seeing them turn that heart into cold and darkness. Going against every ounce of being it was raised into, Leia had the same experience between the father she never properly met and the son she raised for 10 years until he became a Jedi like his grandfather and uncle. Leia watched as TIE fighters rained down on the city, cutting down every ounce of tower and life in the way. One of the First Order dreadnoughts took aim at the plot of land where the Jedi Temple stood, and within moments the entire area was erased. The First Order was removing the Jedi from their books, and even more than that, the Jedi's former temple was decimated. Kylo did this because Sidious could not. Instead, Sidious built a house for himself. Kylo saw the flaws of Sidious's ego. Kylo also saw the flaws with Vader, because maybe he killed thousands, but he was never able to erase their image. Kylo was going to build his legacy on the ashes of his grandfathers. This was not some new Vader. This was a different animal. He was able to defeat his master, and now he was going to rise into the position of Supreme Leader. As bombardments were carried out across Coruscant, a massive palace would be constructed over the remnants of the Jedi Temple. Kylo was not playing around. He wanted his power to be seen, galaxy-wide, so that every single sentient being could witness his rise to power. The people of the New Republic went into panic. They knew that they had to get to Coruscant to help the people of the planet. If they didn't, more systems, former Imperial systems especially, could rally to the side of the First Order. But by the looks of what Coruscant was going through, there was going to be a good chance that no one would want to join the side of the First Order. After all, Coruscant had been treated badly since the fall of the Empire. It was subjugated to pain and suffering because of Operation Cinder, and then as the Empire fell and the New Republic swept in, the people were uplifted and then forgotten all about, as the New Republic abandoned what had been the capital of the galaxy for millennia, and instead crowning the Hosnian system as the new capital of the galaxy. Many citizens of Coruscant were rather put down by this. While yes, the rule of the Empire was over, it was still hurtful to be completely forgotten by the new ruling power in the galaxy. The members of the New Republic immediately prepared for combat. All the vessels they had to destroy the Supremacy were put together so that they could fight the First Order over Coruscant, and then defeat Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. Everyone was ready within hours, and the New Republic fleet was ready to jump to hyperspace, with Admiral Akbar in command of the entire New Republic fleet, where he should have been for the past few decades. Akbar prepped everyone in the fleet, and they were away into combat. Back on Maikito, Luke was still training Rey and Finn, but he himself sat quiet. Luke looked over at the snow falling onto the platforms as Rey and Finn held the uncomfortable positions, all of them trying to allow their bodies to find peace within the Force itself. Luke's eyes started to water, though, as he stood up and looked over the edge. The death through the Force could be felt. So many people were suffering worlds away, and it was, in his mind, his fault. He never stopped Kylo, and his heart was wrenching. Luke could imagine how Yoda felt, and this feeling was atrocious. Luke didn't let a single tear fall as he took a deep breath, feeling the cold Maikito breeze cut through him as he let out his breath, to see it form before his very eyes. Luke felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see the soft eyes of Rey, as she asked her master what was wrong. Luke looked back, red-lined eyes. The visibility of tears still remained at the bottom of his eyes. Rey heard the snow crack from behind her. She could feel it too. She then turned to see Finn. Finn felt the pain as he grabbed the snow into a ball in his fist as he thought all about what he was feeling. Luke turned as he tried to help the two who were with him. There was one defining characteristic that differed between Rey and Finn. It was natural, it wasn't a choice. Rey was an empath, and while Finn was empathetic, he wasn't an empath. He could feel with the Force, and that was it. Rey didn't feel the atrocities of Coruscant. Rather, she felt Luke's pain and then Finn's pain before she herself felt the pain of Coruscant and the people of Coruscant. Rey turned over and got down next to Finn as she wrestled her arm around Finn's arm and placed her hand over his hand. Finn looked at her as he too held back tears. She told Finn to let go. He couldn't. The snow began to melt in his hand as water slowly fell out of the ice shell that he created. Luke stepped forward into the snow as it creaked under his first step. Finn said that he couldn't save them. They needed to. Luke spoke up, telling Finn that he couldn't blame himself for something that was out of his control. Rey looked back at Luke to see what he was trying to say. Luke carried on telling Finn that what they could do now could prevent the suffering from happening again. It was a travesty, yes, that the people of Coruscant had to suffer, but their training, here and now, needed to be completed before they faced Kylo. Rey asked why they couldn't face him now. Luke shook his head, telling them that he foresaw more pain, and because of that pain, enslavement and turmoil in Coruscant would shatter its population. As they all fled into the lower levels of the city, the same lower levels that were operated by criminals of the planet. After that, it would all be up to the people of Coruscant if they could put up a formidable fight against the First Order or not. Luke told them that they needed to train hard now. He didn't foresee this, but he knew what was going to happen. Rey helped Finn up as he loosened his grip on the snow, as the water and snow fell down to the feet. The two of them walked over towards Luke, asking what was going to happen. Luke frowned as he looked into their eyes, telling the two of them that it had already started. Over Coruscant, a battle began. The New Republic fighters jumped out of their vessels as Akbar and Radiss's grandson led a counter-offensive against the First Order. Though the First Order fleet was overly supplied, it was every vessel the First Order possessed, including 2 retrofitted and modified Superstar dreadnoughts. The First Order was also equipped with multiple dreadnoughts, the same one that appeared over Dakar with their massive cannons. These dreadnoughts were the same weapons that bombarded Coruscant when the First Order first arrived, but tragically the New Republic didn't realize what they were in for until they arrived over Coruscant and looked at the fleet they faced. Though with Akbar in command of the fleet, there was little to worry about and what might happen. The New Republic was in the right hands, and then the battle commenced. It was tense. The firefight was explosive. Republic fighters jumped into combat as Poe Dameron led the Republic on its attack. From the ground came elite squadrons of TIE fighters, and there, led by Kylo Ren. And the fighters following Kylo Ren, not armed by Imperial aces, were the Knights of Ren. All former Jedi who Kylo had joined him when he left the Order. They were all on offensive on behalf of their leader. He trained them well with the Force, and even more so with lightsaber combat and fighter combat. Kylo was one thing for sure, and that he was a spitting image of Anakin when he was still a man. The fleet combat was even more intense than what was going on between the fighters. While Kylo Ren, the Knights, and the Aces were cutting through Rebel fighters and making their way for SF-17s, which were still hovering over the bulk of the fleet. The New Republic heavy hitters were struggling more than they were in the deep space against the Supremacy. First Order vessels unloaded their heavy artillery into the New Republic forces, and with the dreadnoughts firing their massive lasers, the Republic fleet began to show weakness. The plan wasn't over yet. Kylo used the full extent of the Imperial Remnant forces and everything within the First Order arsenal. The New Republic was going to be flanked, and then 2 Imperial Remnant-era interdictors pulled around the side of Coruscant. The New Republic was interlocked in gridlock, as several New Republic vessels began to struggle against the firepower of the First Order. The counterattack led by the First Order was more than the New Republic anticipated. All of a sudden, the Radiss was hit with a massive shot from one of the dreadnoughts. Admiral Akbar looked out across the battlefield as he realized that the ship lost all of its shields. The misconception from the New Republic was not realizing the true capacity of evil that the First Order had. When the interdictors arrived, the First Order fleet moved forward. The Super Star Destroyer that the Republic modified was taking a lot of damage, as Admiral Akbar requested that the fleet attack the interdictors and escape back to Kuat. The New Republic fleet crumbled as more of the flagships of the Age of Rebellion tumbled. Poe Dameron got locked into combat with the Knights of Ren. His squadron was following him, and they were exploited as they were then cut down. Kylo Ren, on the other hand, led his group of ace pilots around the flank of the New Republic lines, and before their approach could be noticed, it was too late. Kylo Ren and the aces targeted the SF-17s hovering around the main fleet, ill-placed by Vice Admiral Holdo. She was ordered by Akbar to keep them back, but where they were currently grouped was in a dangerous manner. When Kylo and the Ace Squadron pulled around and fired on the SF-17s, they set off an ignition to make the first one of them explode into a fiery ray of destruction. The bombers were right next to the bulk of the Republic fleet, and when the bomb went off, the fleet from the inside exploded. The Republic fleet was in chaos, while the Super Star Destroyer led by Radiss's grandson was able to clear a path by knocking out both of the First Order interdictors. Its engines were compromised. Kylo Ren called over to the command deck of the flagship of the fleet to Admiral Pryde. He was one of Palpatine's most loyal dogs. Now he served the grandson of Vader. As he received his orders, Kylo ordered Pryde to keep up the assault. The Republic would be fleeing. Kylo specifically told Pryde to target the engines of the retreating vessels, which is exactly what they did. Radiss's grandson moved the SSD into the front of the rest of the fleet as he took the bulk of firepower while the fleet retreated. But the ship was already so badly damaged that within moments the entire structure crumbled apart, leaving the Radiss, commanded by Akbar, behind. As the Republic fleet pulled out of combat, Poe tried to get into contact with Akbar, but all the frequencies were being jammed, as the vessel was left behind and the First Order approached the remnants of the New Republic fleet, unable to escape into hyperspace. The very few vessels able to escape Coruscant were in hyperspace, living with what had just happened. It was the most catastrophic defeat for the Republic, Rebellion, and Resistance war effort ever. Sure, the Hazian system, but as a militaristic loss, nothing compared to the entire New Republic fleet that was just dismantled over Coruscant. Admiral Akbar watched as Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren entered the Radiss. The Knights of Ren were following Kylo. The only reason the Radiss was spared in the wreckage is because Kylo wanted to be the one to kill his mother with his own lightsaber. He was devoting himself to the darkness, and while he didn't feel her presence at the Battle of Coruscant, he wanted to be sure. The Knights of Ren all wielded their own constructed crimson lightsabers. They dispersed away from Kylo as they cut down anyone trying to escape. The hull of the Radiss was completely shattered. There were very few parts of the ship holding together. The good Admiral, Akbar, waited on the bridge, because he knew more than anyone that the captain must go down with his ship. When the First Order didn't obliterate the wreckage of his ship, he sent all the engineers on board to get the engines and the hyperdrive ready. The hyperdrive was in decent condition, but the engines were shut down. More or less, if they could get the engines online, then they could escape, and bring Kylo and the Knights of Ren before the Republic and have them killed. But that wasn't an option. Kylo, much like his grandfather, put fear into those whose last moments of life existed within his presence. Each man and woman had to run away or face the danger head-on. The triumphant New Republic was no longer triumphant, and the members of the ship had to serve to their last breath. With the Radiss being so heavily damaged, the lights on the inside flickered and half of the doors were jammed. Circuitry everywhere was bolting out of the walls, and the hull itself creaked and croaked like it was being ripped apart. Kylo himself tore through Republic forces, cutting down several, snapping the necks of others and snapping the backs of even more people, dragging some down hallways and realizing his true power that sat within him. He may have been replaying all the Darth Vader hits, but Kylo Ren was being more than that. He was finding himself on the dark side, and he was separating himself from any chance of redemption. Kylo wasn't submitting to the Sith or to a master, but he was going to follow his own will, as a supreme leader barged down the door to the command bridge as he looked at the man he grew up knowing. Sure, not as well as Chewie or Luke, for example, but Kylo looked at Admiral Akbar. The Admiral showed Kylo everything on the Radiss when he was first assigned the vessel back in the day. Akbar carried young Ben Solo throughout the ship, showing him everything there was to see, teaching him about what it was like to command such a vessel, and the excitement of taking the Radiss into his command. Akbar looked into the eyes of the boy. He didn't say anything. He just looked at Kylo. Maybe for Akbar it was like looking into the little boy he used to know, or even looking at General Skywalker during the Clone Wars, but he couldn't muster the words. He just watched as Kylo came into the room and looked at Akbar. Momentarily, he stood there and looked at him. Kylo locked eyes, and then, ever so swiftly, twisted his hand and Akbar's neck snapped as he fell lifelessly to the ground. Kylo turned around to see the Knights of the Ren. The ship was clear. There was no sign of Leia Organa, so they left the ship, and then Admiral Price obliterated the vessel. Back on Kuat, the remaining Republic fleet emerged and licked its wounds. They had to report to the main group of the New Republic's leaders on Mon Cala what had just happened on Coruscant. The First Order wasn't lazying around about getting the information out that they obliterated the New Republic over Coruscant. While Coruscant struggles weren't being shown or the oppression of the people in the new capital, the victory over the New Republic was making news galaxy-wide. The failure of the New Republic made planets rally in fear. The terror they faced from the Empire was seemingly back, and without a galactic senate or any type of established government since the destruction of the Hosnian system, the worry was for what Supreme Leader Ren was going to do. But for the first couple of days after the Battle of Coruscant, there was nothing but silence from the First Order. While the New Republic gathered back up over Kuat and moved its diplomatic capital to Mon Cala, the members of the Resistance, Rebellion, and New Republic realized that their threat was larger than the First Order. It called for the assistance of the Jedi. Leia knew that she would have to call upon her brother, but the chances of Finn and Rey being ready were very low, so Leia in her old age would yet again have to lead against overwhelming odds. The New Republic fleet was decimated. They lost Admiral Akbar, Radiss's grandson, and Vice Admiral Holdo, to name a few. The Republic fleet was in shambles, and without a leading commander, Poe Dameron would have to step up to the plate. There weren't many systems that were early on aligning themselves with the First Order, but that could easily change. Luckily, there was something that would favor the New Republic, and that was the ownership of the massive shipyards across the galaxy, aside from the one currently over Coruscant. The only issue is that most of these shipyards had been demilitarized by the New Republic. It would take some heavy lifting to move the Republic shipyards back into militarization. On Coruscant, Kylo sat on his throne. A massive structure was constructed above the remnants of the former Jedi Temple. It was to be a military operations base, but on top was the throne room that belonged to Kylo Ren. The room was surrounded by glass so that Kylo could see what he captured, what he did. Kylo was surrounded by a royal guard and, of course, the Knights of Ren. Admiral Price entered the room seeking guidance for what he may do next. Kylo Ren had a strategy. He had it mapped out for the First Order, and with a loyal Admiral Price, it would only be a matter of time until both the New Republic and the Jedi were snuffed out and defeated. Price asked about what the main priority was. Kylo sneered as he explained that the New Republic was the only threat. While the Jedi were of concern, Kylo understood that the galaxy needed to respect the First Order. Admiral Price was ordered to spend a quarter of the budget on the construction of support ships. Price was confused, but then Kylo cleared it up for him, explaining that the Resistance, the Rebellion, and the New Republic all relied heavily on fighters for strength. The three factions were reliant on hit-and-run tactics, until the New Republic and the later part of the Rebellion were able to strike with heavy cruisers and capital ships. And now, because the New Republic lost most of its heavy cruisers, including three of the most prominent leaders in its navy, the First Order needed to be prepared for hit-and-run tactics. The new TIE fighters were much more advanced than the ones from the Imperial era, which would benefit the First Order, and now they needed to have anti-fighter cruisers consistently ready. Admiral Price understood the assignment. Kylo also informed him that they should continue producing capital ships, but the main priority at the moment was holding on to Coruscant, and then from Coruscant, they would breach out and begin to assault elsewhere in the galaxy. Admiral Price saw this young, vibrant leader as a possibility of a more sustainable empire than the one that Palpatine or even Snoke ruled. While Price was extremely loyal to Palpatine, he saw the younger leader as one that could take on and take the First Order the distance the Empire could not maintain. Though for now, it would take time, and that was perfectly fine. Time was on their side for the First Order. Admiral Price was ordered to bring Kylo a plan of attack for the next 5 years of expansion and how it would be done within the next week. Kylo was going to be persistent on the progression of the First Order and how that progression would literally look. On the other side of the galaxy, Luke sat and meditated, hovering in the air surrounded by the silence of the snow landing around him. His two new students were out, scavenging across Maikito, looking for their Kyber crystals. Luke was focusing on his nephew, Ben Solo. While Luke tried to associate Ben as Ben rather than Kylo as Ben, he was struggling. As much as Luke knew that there was no one that was ever truly gone, he did at this moment feel that Ben was gone. He was too enamored with the power that Vader had, and because he wasn't able to be stopped at the moment, it would only get worse as he continued to feed his ego with those around him who lifted him up as the supreme leader. Luke thought about everything that happened. He, of course, could feel the genocide on Coruscant and the massive defeat of the New Republic. He foresaw that one. Luke felt guilty for it all. While he couldn't face down the entire First Order by himself, he did feel guilty for what happened. The New Republic was decimated, and Luke couldn't do anything about it. The tragedy of it was the fact that Luke helped birth the rebellion into having a fighting chance, and to see it unravel pained him. He knew his sister could help the New Republic, but there was worry that the New Republic wouldn't have the same resolve as the rebellion. For the next 3 years, a lot would change in the galaxy. Finn and Rey hadn't fully completed their training, but the two of them were incredibly impressive. Luke had trained them in the ways of the Force. Finn adopted Forms 2 and 3 as his main style of lightsaber combat, while Rey followed suit with her master and learned the ways of Form 5. Finn adopted a green lightsaber, and Rey, while she wielded a double-bladed blue lightsaber. Luke was rather impressed. The most unique blade from his students was Kylo's crossguard, but never did any of his students have a double-bladed weapon. Luke was overly proud of his students. Not only did Finn and Rey excel through their training, but the two of them were incredibly impressive. They both could use the Force exceptionally, and they did something for Luke. They brought the best out of him. Luke was able to unlearn the ways of the ancient Jedi, the same teachings that he pushed onto Grogu, and those same teachers that forced Grogu out of the Order, the same ones that made Kylo embrace the dark side. For Luke, this was triumph. He felt like himself again. He embraced his new path, and he was prepared to lead these two on a journey against the First Order. They'd spent the last 3 years on Maikito instead of going from planet to planet, and now they were going to abandon the icy planet and head for Kuat, where the New Republic fleet and leadership was stationed. Over the last 3 years, the New Republic struggled. Their efforts to take down the First Order were almost hopeless. While the New Republic was able to obtain some small victories, time after time, most of their losses came through skirmishes, the same type of victories that helped the rebellion so long ago. Hera Syndulla and her son Jacen Syndulla rejoined the ranks of the New Republic. Ezra Bridger and Ahsoka both helped out where they could. Neither of them were going to meet up on Maikito to help the Jedi in training though. Ahsoka and Ezra had actually spent the last 6 months undercover on Coruscant. It was difficult, but they were able to infiltrate the capital of the First Order. Though the First Order, 2 months in, placed a shield gate around the planet, similar to the one the Empire had over Scarif. The New Republic lost contact with the two, and so they had to plan around it. The New Republic was really struggling. They lost a lot of troops, and morality was lower than ever. They were still popular amongst the people of the galaxy, but most of those people were losing hope. Of course, those loyal to the Empire joined the First Order, because the First Order was playing more conservative than the Empire did. These planets had to defend themselves with their own resources. As for the First Order fleet, it had tripled in size over the last 3 years, and it was entirely stationed over Coruscant. Loyalist planets to the First Order had to build their own fleets and supply their own troops. Because of this massive build in size of the First Order, they were able to seize planets and systems surrounding Coruscant. Most of the core belonged to the First Order. The only exception was Kuat. It was an impenetrable fortress of the New Republic. While originally the New Republic intended on defending the planet of Mon Calamari, Admiral Price launched an attack on the longtime rebellion allied world and obliterated shipyards whilst crushing its governmental system. The New Republic was very much on its heels. The only kryptonite for the First Order was Kuat. Leia was still leading, but at the moment she was feeling weak. She felt as if she couldn't carry on at this anymore. The severity of the defeats were starting to get to her. The First Order was able to strategize against the New Republic, and because of their ability to plan for the Republic's behavior, the Republic was beginning to struggle. Leia and Hera were struggling to come up with a new plan, but when all looked hopeless, a young woman from Corellia came to the Republic's aid. She was a young redhead, and she was recruited into the First Order during her teens, because she was incredibly bright at school. She wasn't even in military school, but because she was forced into the First Order, she was forced to change her skills in academia into skills for strategy. It was all to keep her family alive, though when her parents passed away, she had to leave the First Order. No one would be hurt by her leaving the First Order, considering her family was her parents. Her name was Kalara Vincel. She came to the New Republic to help out. She had a very demanding presence. When she walked in a room, she caught everyone's attention. Kalara was welcomed into the New Republic by Hera Syndulla, and because of that, she was allowed to speak in front of the entire New Republic military power structure. She wasn't promoted to any roles, but when the New Republic began to see success under her operations, she was given a higher role. She would continue to grow in the ranks because of her ability to lead. The New Republic was also switching from its original focus on fighter combat to focus on capital ships, especially because hit and runs were no longer working. Without Mon Calamari, Captain Kalara instructed the New Republic to focus on higher rates of firepower from turbolasers and a focus on more conservative approach to the shield generators. While this was going to be a difficult combination, she knew the weakness of every vessel inside of the First Order fleet. She also demanded that the New Republic deconstruct the SF-17s and turn them into new bombers. Whether it be Y-Wing Mach 3s or something different, the New Republic very clearly needed bombers that wouldn't crumble under pressure like they did at the Battle of Coruscant. Kalara was well studied and she knew of everything that cost the New Republic losses of the last 3 years. From Maikito to Kuat, the three Jedi made their move. Over the past 3 years, Rey and Finn had begun a relationship. It was slow moving, but it was effective as a relationship. It was also completely supported by Luke. The love that Rey and Finn had for each other was obvious to Luke on board of the Radiss, and instead of making the same mistake he made with Grogu, he encouraged Finn and Rey to enjoy the relationship with each other when they went to Maikito. The two were excited about it considering they had known traditions of the Jedi Order. When the three Jedi arrived at Kuat, there was tension everywhere. Captain Kalara was being moved to Admiral per request of Hera Syndulla and Leia Organa. The three Jedi would be informed immediately of what was happening. The First Order was currently mounting up an assault on Kuat. The main bulk of the First Order fleet was coming from Coruscant. Captain, now Admiral Vencel, planned for this, and her plan consisted of jumping around the First Order fleet and flanking the First Order at Coruscant. It was going to be a difficult operation, and the defense platforms at Kuat would be the only defense, but for the Battle of Coruscant, it would be unexpected. Admiral Kalara expressed that the First Order had been expecting an attack for the last 2 years. After the shield gate went up, they lowered their defenses, assuming that the New Republic would never show. There was a massive plan being prepared, though. Kalara had time to study the Battle of Scarif and every other battle during the Age of Empire that involved a shield gate. She realized that the shield gate would be the first issue. So, they would send in a task group in a First Order shuttle. Luke, Finn, Rey, and a couple of other operatives would go down with them. The Jedi would go find and destroy Kylo Ren, while the operatives would help the rebels on the ground rise up against the First Order. It was a multi-part plan, and for Kalara, the most important part was ensuring that the First Order turned on the shield gate, because the ground troops wouldn't get support from the air. And as for Kalara, the rest of the New Republic knew Ahsoka and Ezra were raising an army to fight back the First Order on the ground. Everything was set and planned, but there was only one issue. Luke's sister was sick. She was old in age, and it happened. The stress of the war certainly didn't help, and Luke went to his sister's side until it was time for him to go. The two of them had a lot to talk about, a lot of memories to think of. Funny stories with the three of them, Han included. But the most important thing is that Leia would be able to stay at peace. That's all Luke wanted for her. And tragically, before Luke was called to the hangar bay, Leia flatlined. In a room where the two droids who served her entire life, C-3PO and R2-D2, side by side, watching over the daughter of whose mother and father they used to watch. Luke felt awful, but he held his sister's hand until the very end, and slowly covered her face with cloth. Luke informed the people of the medical bay to keep this quiet, because it could crush Republic morale if they knew that she passed. And while Leia had gone, she was with her father and the old Obi-Wan, up in the Force. Leia had finally accepted her father's apology and came to peace with him. With the death of his sister on his mind, Luke loaded up into the First Order shuttle and awaited for Finn, Rey, and the rest of the task force. It felt like the moments before Scarif. The odds were the same, but without the Death Star to defeat. The villain was Kylo Ren and the overbearing First Order fleet. The New Republic had to be ready, and all the men and women who signed up for this fight were ready. Within an hour or so, the shuttle would be off. Admiral Kalara manned the helm of the first New Republic Super Star Destroyer. While it wasn't called a Super Star Destroyer, it was essentially that. This New Republic vessel was everything Admiral Kalara wanted it to be. Fast-firing, Mon Calamari shielded, and more powerful than the combined power of two Imperial-era Super Star Destroyers, the same ones that the First Order had over Coruscant. The New Republic pulled out of Kuat and abandoned the planet hours before the First Order arrived. The First Order shuttle holding all the New Republic troops and the Jedi arrived over Coruscant. The members were ready for this, and with the proper codes delivered by Admiral Kalara, the New Republic was able to get in. The First Order was not the Empire. The codes had to be gotten within the first planetary rotation. Because the First Order changed codes every planetary rotation, so that old codes more than 24 hours old couldn't be used. Kylo wasn't like Palpatine. He didn't want to play with his food. He'd rather chop it up and eat it whole. The First Order ran a tighter ship. The insubordinate generals, captains, and officers of any type would face execution if they seemed to be in it for themselves. Kylo studied the Empire strictly and understood why the failure continued to happen, how someone as brilliant as Thrawn was undermined so many times, and it was because of other people with other ambitions. The First Order learned from the mistakes the Empire made, and it was a matter of ensuring that this lasted. With the New Republic shuttle landing inside the shield gate, step 1 of the mission was complete. Kylo could feel the presence of Luke, and immediately told the Knights of Ren to disperse and find Luke, giving them orders to kill him. Kylo wasn't playing around. He didn't want the traditional bring the good guy to his lair so we can monologue at him until he made an escape. No. Kylo wanted the job to be dealt with. Kylo's lair was full of top-notch security, and with the Knights of Ren going out, the security tightened. Kylo wasn't insecure, he just knew that there were other Jedi here on the planet with Luke. Kylo, over the last 3 years, while being Supreme Leader, held up to the name that he was associated with his grandfather. Kylo used the inherited genes of Skywalker and trained himself harder than he'd ever trained before. He fooled Snoke and Luke by making them believe he was training as hard as he could before. But when he took the helm of his own life, he trained harder than anyone had ever trained him before, and he didn't stop. Kylo became a freak of nature within the Force. He was able to attain the same prowess and balance in the dark side that Anakin couldn't. Had Anakin survived Mustafar, there's a good chance that he and Kylo would have been at around the same power at this moment. Of course, Anakin's roof was much higher than Kylo's, but Kylo at the moment, at his roof, was as powerful as Anakin Skywalker ever got. He also taught this to his students. Kylo only took the best students from Luke's order. They proved to be the best as the Knights of Ren. This was reminiscent of the Sith Triumvirate, except there were 6 of them rather than 3. The shuttle landed in the lower levels of the city. It was obvious for the first 100 levels that the First Order was working its way down into the depths of Coruscant, but for 2 years they couldn't get past where they were. The First Order decided to let the rebels suffer in the dark, but instead they were building up, especially with Ezra and Ahsoka down there for 6 months. The 2 of them were enthralled when they found out the rebels had arrived, but when Ezra found out there were more Jedi, he was almost giddy with excitement. But the Jedi didn't come down. The Jedi exited topside. They were in the city streets. The effects of the genocide were shown. At this point, there were very distinct differences between those who favored the First Order and those who favored the New Republic. Those who favored the New Republic were left dead throughout the streets of Coruscant, and entire districts reduced to rubble and ash, while those who supported the First Order were propped up in luxury estates. The 3 Jedi walked through the rubble of rotten bodies, destroyed buildings, and broken droids. Their target was obvious. It was a massive tower in the middle of the city. It overlooked everything. Its dark shadow clouded the entire planet. In the lower levels, the rebels began to amount their forces to make a push against the surface. It was clear that a revolution was beginning. In the space of Coruscant, Admiral Price ordered the shield gate to close. There was a proximity alert. The New Republic was here, and out of hyperspace emerged the entire New Republic fleet. Poe Dameron jolted off from behind General Syndulla and her son Jacen Syndulla as they led an attack on the First Order. Admiral Vencel ordered the fleet into one of her several formations. She ordered them into the first one and prepare a counteroffensive into the second formation. She knew it would confuse the First Order fleet. She also knew Admiral Price personally because she worked under him for a good while. She knew he was a traditional combatant. It would work for the time being during the Age of Rebellion, but it wouldn't work now. She knew exactly how to beat an old dog at his own game. At Kuat, the First Order fleet arrived, out to the surprise that the fleet over Kuat was empty. But they were engaged by a fight with several Golan platforms and other defense platforms over the planet. Even worse for the First Order is that there was a gravity well generator at the back of the New Republic defense lines, which meant the First Order couldn't escape into hyperspace unless they destroyed the generator. Everything was set in stone as the New Republic jumped into combat. The troops on the ground pushed out of the lower levels, and their uprising couldn't just be heard citywide, it could be seen. The First Order created a barricade around the lower levels so that no one could escape and get into combat with the First Order loyalists, but with a strong effort the rebel forces pushed through and out of the barricade. Luke, Finn, and Rey heard the sound of a battle beginning as they picked up their pace and started rushing for the Palace of Ren. But Luke felt something and stopped. He looked over at his students and brought them close with him. He told them that the Knights of Ren were coming. Luke told the 2 of them that they needed to get to Kylo and stop him. Luke said that he would hold off the Knights of Ren and ensure that both Finn and Rey could get to the palace undetected. Luke told the 2 of them that he appreciated everything they did for him. The 2 of them looked at Luke with a little confusion. Luke was thankful for everything. The two of them taught him how to be a better teacher. They taught him the true meaning of a Jedi, and those lessons are something he forgot about when he first started the New Order a long time ago. The two of them helped him realize the true potential and the true power behind being a true Jedi. Luke nodded his head and wished the two of them to have the Force be with them. Luke turned the corner and vanished into a dark alley. Rey and Finn looked at each other, and then they made their way to the palace. They ran through the streets as they leaped up walls and scaled buildings. The two of them were on a path to fixing this. In space, Admiral Kylo moved the fleet into the second formation and ordered in the second wave of fighters to drop out of hyperspace. Admiral Kylo had everything in place to master flank the First Order, and it was working to perfection. Considering she knew all the reserve forces that the First Order had around Coruscant, it was just a matter of getting Admiral Price to release the fleet. Over Kuat, the First Order was struggling to hold itself together. With the bulk of their fleet displaced and the rest of it at Coruscant, the Golan platforms and the defense platforms over Kuat were forcing the First Order to make moves towards the gravity well generator, and because of its location, it meant sacrificing vessels and possibly the fleet to get there. Back on Coruscant, the rebels were facing down the First Order's walkers, tanks, troops, and just about anything they had. Because Admiral Price closed off the shield gate, the forces on the ground were pretty much without air support. This, of course, affected the rebels more, because there were hangars on the surface, but the amount of TIE fighters were limited. Most of them went into space before the shield gate was closed. Kylo Ren stood in his chambers as he looked down at the chaos. The battle was massive. It was premeditated. 3 years in the works finally coming to life, and it was alive. Kylo waited patiently, his robes crawled down to the floor, as his guards stood in silence. Ren also had a holomap of the space battle up in the middle of the room. He was monitoring everything that was going on. The fleet battle was interlocked in a gridlock, and right below the palace, Finn and Rey were sneaking in. Luke, on the other hand, made his way towards the battlefront when he heard the familiar voices of one of his former best students. Luke turned around and without hesitation, a lightsaber slammed down behind him. Luke wasn't necessarily ready, but he whipped out his green lightsaber as he twisted around and looked at the Knights of Ren. The Knights emerged from the shadows, each of them drawing their crimson blades. Luke was disappointed, but now he would teach them one final lesson. The Knights of Ren moved in as Luke spun around under a lightsaber and leapt backwards over another. Luke then swung his blade around as it collided with one of the Knights. Luke danced back as his feet steadied around the Knights, and they pushed on him. Luke really didn't want to kill them, but right now, it was between them and him, and he had to choose himself. Luke deflected a strike as he pulled back and jabbed forward, cutting through one of the Knights. A short ways away from him, Rey and Finn snuck through the ventilation shafts of the palace. They all avoided as many guards as they could, making their way towards the throne room. They found a spot to jump down from the ceiling, and when they landed, they turned to see dark troopers. These were incredibly powerful robots, and they were waiting for the Jedi to drop. There were about 60 of them. There were 3 hallways that led to the elevator shaft. Each of the hallways had 20 dark troopers. Finn and Rey looked at each other as Finn grabbed Rey's hand as he pulled her back and flung her around forward, as he then used the Force to shove her with all the momentum he had as she ignited her double-bladed lightsaber into the middle hallway. Finn ignited his as he danced in the middle of the hallway. The dark troopers began to fire at Finn as he deflected all the shots and avoided others. The dark troopers ended up shooting each other because of Finn's elegance with his lightsaber and with his moves. As for Rey, she twisted down and jumped up as she cut through the droids using both sides of her lightsaber as she ripped apart the droids. Finn and Rey were flawless at this point. Rey turned around after she cut down the final dark trooper and saw Finn waiting for her without his lightsaber ignited. She looked at him as he slyly asked her what she was waiting for. A swift roll of her eyes came as she bolted down the hallway and jumped into the elevator with him as he prepared to face down Kylo Ren. Luke, on the other hand, was fending off the Knights of Ren as he cut down a 4th member of the Knights. Luke twisted back as one of the Knights cut forward and jabbed through Luke's robotic hand. Luke looked down as he pulled the lightsaber back with his non-dominant hand. The Knights then started to get giddy as they closed in on Luke, each swinging simultaneously, all of them trying their best to best the former Grand Master. Luke parried and kicked out to his left, throwing one of the Knights into a bunch of trash cans. Luke twisted around as he threw his right arm forward into another Knight as he lifted them off of their feet and threw them into the side of the building with the Force. Luke jumped back as he parried a strike from another one of the duelists. Luke blocked and then swung back at her, knocking her off of her feet. The Knight who was in the trash cans jumped up and joined one of the other Knights still standing. Luke leapt in between the two of them as he ducked and cut through one of their legs, while the same one jabbed forward, stabbing his fellow Knight in the face. Luke cut up as he killed the other Knight. 2 more left. Luke spun back as he blocked another Knight. She shoved the Grand Master into the wall as she tried to kill him. The one that was in the side of the building jumped down with his blade speared down. Luke saw this as he pushed the knight in front of him to the side as he sheathed his lightsaber and pulled down to the side. The knight speared down, stabbing through the back of his fellow knight as she fell to the ground lifeless. Luke pulled back around as he cut down the final knight. Luke looked down, disappointed in the failure of all these students. 6 of them. They should have been able to do more than just take off his robotic hand, though it wasn't exactly a surprise. When they were Jedi, that was the best they'd ever done. Luke grabbed the robotic hand and reattached it as he pulled from his belt a little device to reattach his hand. In the throne room, Kylo was seated in his seat. He stuck up in the corner of his seat as he grinned at the door opening before him. Kylo was smug, with one leg relaxed up on the chair and another one placed lightly on the ground. The room was chanting with comm chatter. Kylo was listening to the fleet in combat and the ground combat. Everything was really not going his way. The fleet combat was still a stalemate, with Admiral Vanessel still beginning to make her headway. Not to mention the fleet over Kuat was completely obliterated. There would be no reinforcements from the majority of their fleet left from Kuat, though there was reinforcements coming from other core worlds that were aligned with the First Order, though all of their troops were not First Order created. Admiral Price was trying to hold out as long as he could. Admiral Kalara made some choices of targeting the dreadnoughts first, and her fleet was doing exceedingly better than Akbar's because of it. The last battle of Coruscant was ill-planned, and they paid for it. But because of Admiral Vanessel's knowledge of the First Order, she was prepared to defeat them in this contest of strength. The fighter fight was going well too, as Hera Syndulla, Jason Syndulla, and Poe Dameron cut through the fighters, with Chewie and Lando inside the Millennium Falcon. Ren was still stationed silently. As the elevator door opened, he flicked his fingers and his royal guards leapt forward to defend their supreme leader. Kylo had no anticipation of beating these 2 Jedi with his guard. He knew that he'd have to do it himself. He watched as his royal guard leapt into action as the 2 Jedi stood at each other's backs, an exercise they were very familiar with. The special part about Finn and Rey was that their romantic bond with one another allowed them to become better in combat. Rey and Finn pushed back the guards as they used each other to defy the training of lifetime elite guards. Their lightsabers were swift. Rey, with her double-bladed lightsaber, was incredible with her efforts. Rey punched forward and Finn moved backwards, a step to mirror what she did as he defended her back. Rey and Finn used each other's momentum to push back and cut down the final few guards. Kylo didn't move a muscle. He just looked at the 2 Jedi.
I just had sex. I'm about to eat nachos! It's the greatest moment of my life! Unless you screw it up with whatever it is you're about to say.
Kylo stood up from his seat. His face was very obviously disgruntled. Kylo stepped forward as he placed his hand on his belt. Not a word was said. It had been 3 years since their last encounter with each other. Kylo was watching the empire he built fall apart, and his anger was through the roof. Though he knew he had to calm himself. He couldn't be controlled by his rage, and instead, he needed to focus on it. Screw it. Kylo ignited his lightsaber and raged forward as Finn and Rey leapt out of the way as they turned to see a streak across the ground. Kylo lifted his crossguard as he placed the weapon in front of his face as he sized up each of his opponents. Kylo leapt forward as Finn jumped into attack. The 2 of them smashed their blades together. Finn was thrown back a little as he pushed with all of his strength against Kylo. The Supreme Leader whipped his blade around as Finn jumped over it and forced his way into offense as Kylo fell back and blocked an offensive attack. Rey leapt forward as Kylo used the Force to throw Rey into Finn. Finn saw it coming as he caught her, and then turned towards Kylo as he used his green blade to hold off the Skywalker. Kylo pushed harder and harder into Finn as he tumbled backwards. Rey got into combat as she swung her blade left and right. Kylo kicked Finn back as he turned and caught Rey's blade at the perfect moment. Those who doubted the effectiveness of a crossguard blade would have been killed in that moment. Kylo dropped back as he put his blade around to the ground and caught each strike that Rey made at him. The 2 of them were interlocked in combat for the first time ever. Rey pushed harder and harder, throwing Kylo off his game as he fought back as hard as he could. Kylo had a moment of opportunity as he studied Rey's aggressive attack pattern. When Rey was vulnerable, he lowered his hand, and from it shot lightning as he caught Rey in the stomach, throwing her backwards. Rey tumbled across the ground as Kylo didn't hesitate to try and kill her while she was down. As Kylo leapt into attack, Finn lunged across the room as his blade slid in front of Kylo's, keeping Rey safe. Finn jolted his elbow out into Ren's face as he swung his blade back against Kylo's. Rey was on the ground, in pain still, as she looked over to see Finn and Kylo duking it out. She had a plan. She got up from around the ground, holding her hand over her stomach where she was shocked by lightning. She got up and loosened herself up as she turned the corner. Finn and Kylo were expertly swinging at each other as their blades clashed over and over again, something that rivaled the beauty of Anakin versus Obi-Wan and Mustafar. The room sounded with the echoes of lightsabers. Rey took apart her lightsaber, divided up into 2 respective blades, as she came around the corner of the throne itself. Kylo jumped back as he used the Force to throw Finn from his feet. Rey and Kylo clashed on the other side of the room. Kylo used all of his strength to push Rey back, as she then grabbed each of her end lightsabers and moved into an overly aggressive and speedy form that she'd practiced with Finn. Kylo stumbled back again and again. There was no redemption. This was for the galaxy. This was for Hope, for Han, for Leia, for everything Kylo destroyed. Rey pushed harder and harder, and then she cut through Kylo's blade. Fear is written in his eyes as he looked down and saw a massive gash cut through his chest. Kylo stumbled back and then tumbled to his knees. He looked at the floor, and then as he fell to the ground, he died. Finn stood up and looked at Rey. They both sheathed their blades as they walked up to each other, grabbing a hold of each other's hands and pulling each other in. The 2 of them gently placed their heads together. It's done. They defeated Kylo Ren. Maybe he wasn't a Sith, but the truth is it didn't matter. He was dead, and so were the Knights of Ren. The palace then began to shake. It was the New Republic. They broke through the shield gate. Admiral Price's fleet was dispersed, and Admiral Calera was able to dispatch fighters to the surface. Rey and Finn looked at each other as they turned their heads and then bolted for an exit. The First Order fleet began to fall apart. Poe Dameron and a squad of X-Wings and Y-Wing Mach 3s led down through the surface of the shield gate as they began to pick their targets. The ground fighting was intense, but with 2 Jedi heading the assault, anything was possible. Ezra and Ahsoka worked with each other as they cut through the First Order troops, and then the bombers came. X-Wings targeted the palace that Rey and Finn were escaping from. The New Republic fleet was dispatched. Also, some cruisers came down to the surface as well. Admiral Calera turned the vessels around into a defense position. The reinforcements that Price wanted were about to show up, but they wouldn't stay, and they wouldn't be there long enough until they were left in ruin. Rey and Finn were able to escape from the palace before it collapsed. Within hours, the Battle of Coruscant would be won. The First Order would be extinguished, and the fight in the core would begin. The war between the First Order and the New Republic wouldn't last long. There would be victory in the streets of every planet within 2 months of the victory of Coruscant. The New Republic did it, and this time, they wouldn't allow a remnant or First Order to reappear. Coruscant would be rebuilt and turned back into the capital of the galaxy. While the galaxy would have to overcome the adversity of another war, it would find its peace, and it would rejoice in said peace. The Jedi would be rebuilt, and they would rebuild their temple on Coruscant, and the Sith would be uprooted, their temple would be taken away, and from there, a Jedi temple would be placed on top. Not nearly as large as the one that stood before, but it would be a place on Coruscant for refuge and peace. Luke would start this new order inside this temple, and he wouldn't keep the old code. Ahsoka, Finn, Rey, and Ezra would all be the first members of this new order. Finn and Rey would carry on their relationship and eventually have the first child born into this Jedi Order. From there, the New Republic would establish a balance in its policies and would never demilitarize, and the Jedi would go to set forth a new legacy of peace and justice in the galaxy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Icy Raptor, Apollo, Mad Matter Studios, Anakin003, and Gore for supporting the channel. Hit the likes on this video. If you want to see what if, let me know below. Every comments, let me know crowd servers. Check out the Twitch community, Discord, and Patreon if you're supporting in other ways. And for the lightsaber giveaway, go down below. There is a doc. You click on the doc and you write your name on the doc. You have to hit subscribe because we're shooting for 50,000 subscribers. Thank you for 40K. I'm very appreciative for it. I'm super stoked. We're 10,000 away from, or we're a little bit less than 10,000 away from 50,000. I want to give away those 3 lightsabers, so hit that subscribe button, share, and let's get this channel to 50,000 subscribers so we can go after Star Wars Theory. Ain't that right? Anyways, let's talk about our story here. This one was fun. Now I'm going to address this in the first part. I'm going to address this now. I saw a lot of comments on the last video, and it's kind of disheartening. Now, I'm not talking about opinions on the sequels. I don't really care. You all have your own opinions. I have my own opinions. That's not what I'm talking about. If you're a fan of what I write, and you immediately write it off because it's in the sequel trilogy, do you really like what I write? Because I put a lot of heart and soul into this. This is going to be a full movie of over an hour and 40 minutes long. It's going to be about the same runtime as the first, the Force Awakens. So, I saw a lot of comments, and I was kind of disheartened to even write this part 2, and I took a long time writing this part 2 because I was like, is it even worth it? No one's gonna watch it. And if you really like my content, then give it a shot. I know it's the sequels, and I know you don't like the sequels, and I know the sequels aren't popular, but give it a shot. If you like what I do, I'm sure you'll like it, okay? I'm trying my best to bring us together as Star Wars fans, right? We all like Star Wars. Let's enjoy it. We don't have to bully each other, okay? We don't. We're all allowed to like something different in Star Wars. You could like the anime series, or you could like Tales of the Jedi. I don't care. We're all Star Wars fans. Let everyone enjoy it. You don't have to hate everything, okay? You also don't have to love everything, but if you like what I make, give it a shot. Give it a chance. Just don't hate it before it comes out. Anyways, let's talk about the actual story now. I just wanted to address that because that was something that was really kind of disheartening as a content creator and the person that creates these stories for you guys every week and goddamn near every day. This was a lot of fun. I do like writing in the sequel trilogy a lot, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't get to do it often. I don't get to write in the sequel trilogy. I always have to work with Anakin. I always have to work with Sidious as the villain. There's 9 movies where he's the villain. So when I go to the sequels, I can immediately say Palpatine doesn't exist, right? And I get to work with a new villain. I get to work with Snoke. I get to work with Kylo, and that's so much more fun for me. You don't understand the amount of creative decisions I get to change with a whole new character, and that's what I did with this. And now this was inspired by the original script for Duel of the Fates, which was going to be episode 9, the original one before JJ became the leader of that project. And I'm not going to talk about JJ's Rise of Sky Guy, but what I am going to talk about is this one was extremely inspired by the original script for Duel of the Fates, a battle on Coruscant. You know, it's very heavily inspired by that, and that's because I think it would have been a great movie had it come to life. And I'm not throwing shade, I'm just saying I think it would have been a great movie. And a lot of inspiration came from that. Kylo being the main villain. That's one thing I wanted to stick true to. I think Kylo being a main villain is something so remarkable that happens after he kills Snoke. I think that would have been perfect. I think that would have been perfect in an episode 9. That's what I wanted to set up here. I wanted him to kill Snoke in the last episode. He did, right? And the 3-year time gap is essentially between episodes 8 and 9. That's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a time gap, so it's like you're going from movie to movie kind of thing. So I wanted to keep that consistency with the idea of the sequels that I'm doing here. This isn't my sequel rewrite, by the way. I just want to let you guys know. But I wanted to make Kylo the main villain. He deserves to be main villain. Okay, he killed his father, and then he kills Snoke. That's, like, awesome. He killed the bad guy. He should be the bad guy. He has every right to be the main bad guy of the series, and I wanted him to be that. Now, I brought in a new character. I brought in Kalara Vessel. She's a made-up character. She's not real. I just wanted to bring in a new character because I was like, I'll do that instead of doing Holdo, because there's a little bit of a discrepancy with that character. Not that anyone who has a discrepancy with that character hasn't even watched this far. Throwing shade? I will throw shade. Come at me, ho. Anyways, all jokes here, but I wanted to have fun with this, and I really, again, I want to state that I like writing in the sequels because there's a lot more room for creativity, right? There's nothing other than the 3 movies and probably a couple books that I have not read, okay? Or comics or whatever. I don't read the sequel stuff. I don't read any of the stuff, I'll just be honest. But there's a lot more creativity with the prequels. There's Clone Wars, there's the 3 movies, there's a lot more stuff for the Clone Wars. Same with the original trilogy. The original trilogy's been around for 40 years, okay? There's a lot more content. The sequel trilogy has not been around for 10 years, right? I have so much more room for creative freedom, and that's why I really like it, because I can do a lot of unique stuff after Endor, after Jakku. It doesn't matter. It's a lot more fun to play around with it. And as for Luke, I wanted him to have that same failure as a Jedi. I wanted his order to still fail, because it makes sense. It's a good plot point, and I'm not going to act like Rian Johnson didn't have a good plot point there. He just rehashed a little bit what we saw in Return of the Jedi. But if you take that concept and just reform it a little bit and fine-tune the fine points of it, it actually is really, really nice to have Luke kind of be like, well, actually, I know I learned this about the Jedi, but I needed to stop looking into the past to be what the Jedi needed to be. I needed to look at myself to see what the Jedi needed to be. As a Grand Master, I needed to look at myself instead of what was, instead of what failed, right? And that's kind of what I wanted this to be about with the Jedi kind of story, with Finn being a Jedi. And while I know this story, much like a couple others on the channel, didn't specifically focus on Finn, it's the change of making Finn the main character in this so that it can happen, right? So I can retrofit the sequels into fitting that kind of imagery. And I wanted Rey to still be a badass. I wanted Rey and Finn to have a really nice... I wanted them to have a relationship, first of all, and I wanted them to have a nice bond with each other as very powerful Jedi. I made them both equally as powerful because I think that's fair. I think they both should be equally as powerful. Not a dyad. I don't want to do dyads in the sequels, but I wanted to do equally as powerful, and because they are lovers, because they have a romantic connection with each other, that makes them better as a duelist couple, as a couple in general, as a team. It makes them better. And I thought having them have the first children in the New Order would be really interesting. As for Leia passing away, I still wanted to keep consistent with that. I didn't want to throw her into the story. I wanted to pay respect to Carrie because she did pass away from episode 8 to episode 9. So I figured I might as well give that to her, let her pass away naturally in the story. Let it be a nice moment between her and Luke, not where she's surrounded by no one she knows. I wanted it to be between her and Luke, and that's kind of how they were brought into this world. They were brought in, their mother passed away, and they were left alone, and it was the two of them. And because they were split up and all that stuff, they still had their connection, and I wanted her to die with him. I thought that would be a nice kind of story. I didn't want to shoehorn it, make her live longer than she lives in the movies. I wanted to be fair to that, and fair to Carrie. As for everything else, yeah, the Battle of Coruscant I thought would be fun to do. Obviously, again, the idea from the original Duel of the Fates script, I took some parts and I left some parts, and I've done different versions of this where I've been inspired by that story, by that original script for that movie. But this one is probably my favorite iteration, where it's a big fleet battle, and there's a former First Order admiral for the New Republic, and it's just a big battle on the ground, in space, between lightsabers. It's really just an overall coming together story where Luke is able to best his students and be like, well, I'm still the master, and Finn and Rey are able to best Kylo and say, well, look, the dark side isn't as powerful as you think, and we are better as Jedi, as whole Jedi, not just Jedi of a code, but whole Jedi that stand for something more than a code. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this. Other than a little bit of belligerence at the beginning of this commentary, again, if you like what I make, give it a shot, even if it's not part of your favorite era. That's really all it is. If you like what I make, then I'm sure you'll like what I make. Anyways, I love you all, as always. Remember, my friends, spread the love, and always remember, may the Force be with you.